31, 114 BC, and it ends in December 2012. So, is it a remarkable coincidence that at 31, 14 BC, you've basically got the beginning of civilizations occurring. You've got ancient Sumeria, you've got the very, very beginnings of the Egyptian early kingdoms, and that's when we begin to see monuments and other things appearing, generally speaking. Of course, there's other things, but that's a really remarkable coincidence. So what he did is he basically thought, well, perhaps this cycle is like we can see this as like a kind of map of history. And what he did then was basically take the Zolkin, and you can see, go back to that slide, this 260 unit matrix with this kind of pattern in the middle there. I don't know if you can see that clearly. And basically what he's done is taken the 13 Bactons, this 5,125-year cycle, and projected on top of it the 260-day cycle. So instead of each of these being one day, they're now 20 years, 200, several hundred years actually. So what you then get is you get a very interesting picture. And what you can see quite clearly is that the rate of cultural innovation is speeding up as we progress through history. At the beginning here you've got like the Egyptian kingdoms, and then there's kind of like Chinese culture beginning to really flourish at this point. And things are beginning to move here, but it's when we get to the centre, we've got some very interesting stuff. Right at the centre, very, very centre of this whole matrix, is the birth of Buddha, right in the middle. So we have this kind of slow progression in, but once we get to the centre, it really gets a lot faster on the other side. So basically, you've got the Mayan culture here, and it comes and goes quite quickly. And then you've got, after that, you've basically got the beginning of like most of Western civilization. And you don't really get the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution until the last column. The industrial revolutions come down here, and then you've got basically the 20th century and all of that technological innovation. And in the very last square, you basically have where we are now. And in fact, we're not, we're at the very, very bottom of that particular square. We're really a tiny hairbreadth away from the end of this particular cycle. So this was really the first innovative idea on interpreting what the Mayan calendar actually means. And it really has shaped how people have kind of seen this since this book came out. And it's an interesting idea, and what it does, it helps us to explain the processes that we're in this particular unique moment of time. Because if you look around, you can see that, for instance, technology is increasing at an exponential rate. You've got human population increasing on a very similar rate, and yet resources are diminishing. So there does seem to be an argument for the fact that this is a model which can help us explain the processes which we're in. If you were to talk to a Mayan academic and someone who's studying the Mayan culture at the university, you might find that they tend to downplay the whole 2012 story, because there's been an awful lot of kind of like New Age channeling and various different interpretations, end of the world theories, the Sony film, people talking about Armageddon, rushing for the hills, stacking up bean tins, and all of those things. And it's an uncomfortable mix with academia, because basically, if you want to get funding to study the Mayans, don't mention 2012. It's basically a good rule of thumb. So the evidence for the Maya basically predicting what was happening during this period was considered to be quite small by the Mayan academics until quite recently. And then basically this particular stone appeared. It was already known about, but it was really a lot of attention has now been focused on it, because this is a stone carved by the classic Maya culture that existed between 300 and 900 AD. And not only does it have the exact date of December 21st, 2012, it also has an interpretation of what may happen at that particular point. So what we have here is we have piece of evidence from the classic Maya culture that is talking about 2012, which is very significant. So what it says is that the 13th baptism will be finished for a hour for the King. That's the date. There's an unreadable bit, unfortunately. And this is the old translation that's been around for a while. It says something will occur, and there will be the descent of the 9 support gods to the, and we couldn't really tell what was at the end because it got chipped off. So it's a bit frustrating in a way, and yet they're talking about a prophetic event, the return of these 9 gods. And it's interesting because in the Maya mythology, the 9 gods were basically the gods of the underworld. And we'll come to the underworld in a little bit. And the underworld is a very, very significant thing for Maya. So the Maya are actually talking about a prophetic event in this inscription. So there's been some work on that recently, and some new interpretations based on a little redrawing of the glyphs, and people really start paying attention to it. It's actually just a tiny little detail on this, but the interpretation of this stone has really shifted just in the last few months because people are getting really interested, and other people like Jeff Stray are looking at it and looking at alternative interpretations. And this is the latest kind of alternative interpretation, which is that the completion of the 13th baptism for Hal through Kenkin, there will be an apocalypse. And that's the sense of there being a kind of revelation of something that really appears when the 9 gods of the underworld put everything in order. So this is like something quite significant that's actually been spoken about in this stone by the classic Maya. So there's a big difference between what this is and a lot of the speculation and hype that you're going to find around 2012. But nonetheless, what we're actually seeing is that, we have some evidence that something's really going on with this. So when people just try and go, 2012, and just the cycle just clicks over and it starts again, well, yeah, it does. However, this is basically our latest interpretation of one of the inscriptions there. And of course, the Maya were very interested in prophecy. It's this idea of quality of time. It's like they're really part of this culture. The Mayan classical culture, which built the pyramids and carved all these amazing inscriptions, lasted from 300 to 900. It's kind of like a prime phase, where it was really this amazing kind of renaissance of calendrical study, and then basically after 900, it's sort of like got kind of like a lot of dilution from other cultures coming in. I wouldn't say it was better or worse, but it was more kind of mix of different things. So over the last 1,000 years or so, the Maya have seen invasions initially by the Mexican people, and then Itza on the Yucatec Peninsula, and a lot of really substantial changes. And some of the clinical knowledge has been lost. Specifically, knowledge of the December 21st, 2012 end date is something that kind of disappeared probably like 700 or 800 years ago. But the Maya themselves are still living in indigenous communities. And what's remarkable is the actual count of days, the Zolkin count, has been kept accurately for thousands of years to the exact day. So the date, December 21st, 2012, was lost, but the Maya themselves still keep this calendar alive as an indigenous practice. So what the Mayan elders are saying about this time is just really been released in the last year or so. They were finding themselves like assailed by loads of people coming to the Maya lands and saying, well, what's happening in 2012? We want to know what's going on. And a lot of the people, even the traditional wisdom keepers, well, they don't really know. No, everyone's got their own kind of interpretations. So the council, National Council of the Maya got together, and they got 24 of the elders who had the most calendrical knowledge, and they asked them to go away and prepare basically a kind of statement to read to the world about what they thought was going to happen in this time. Because then again, they're not talking about something happening on a specific day, December 21st, 2012. They're talking about something happening in this time. So what the Mayan elders are saying is that we're now in a 7 or 8 year period, possibly a bit longer, that began on October 24th, 2007, that they called the end of time. And at some point during this period, the sky will go dark for between 30 to 72 hours, they say. And it will be unsafe to leave one's home. The thing to do is basically like to stay still and to meditate and to be like, be calm, basically. The thing not to do is to run around outside and to basically like lose one's centre and kind of get caught up in things. And they say that basically during this period there is going to be substantial earth changes, flooding, earthquakes, different things happening. But if we're basically like somewhere grounded during this period of time, for most people this is going to be okay. These changes will pass and we'll go through them. The thing to do is to not like think that it's the end of the world, because it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. They said that people could even die from fright because this is happening. But this isn't something that is necessarily going to happen on 2012. It could happen as late as 2015. But this is actually, what the Mayans themselves are saying. I'm going to come to another idea which kind of links into the Mayan calendrical system, and it kind of it provides another kind of like context for understanding our particular point of time that we're now living in. And we're talking a little bit about an idea that was put forward by John Major Jenkins in his book Mayan Cosmogenesis about there being a particular alignment. Now, to understand this alignment, you have to understand an astronomical phenomenon called the precession of equinoxes. And if you're familiar with astrology, it's also known as the Great Year. And when astrologers talk about, say, like, we're moving from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, this is what they're talking. They're talking about the Great Year of astrology, which effectively is their way of charting this cycle of precession. So what it actually is precession. The effect of precession is basically that if you were to observe a sunrise on a particular day, so say spring equinox, because that's traditional, what you would see is the sun would rise in a certain position against the stars in the background. And if you observed it over a long period of time, what you've actually observed is that background changes. So on a specific day of the year, because obviously, the stellar background which the sun rises against changes throughout the year as it moves along the ecliptic. But the progression against the stellar background on a specific day of the year moves also, and it moves at 1 degree in the sky every 72 years. So this is basically a 25,771 year cycle, and the Great Year is an approximation of that. So this is basically something that the Maya knew about. What's kind of interesting about this is that they did something that no other culture has done with this idea of precession. We know that the Greeks had this idea, the Egyptians had it, and in Vedic India they'd also observed this cycle. And it's the kind of thing that you would observe if you were a culture that was out there making notes, like the megalithic, builders of this country did. And one of the things that the Maya were able to do that no one else we know did was to think, well, okay, we've got this cycle where the sun is moving against this stellar background over time, and if you look up into the sky in the Maya land, the dominant feature is basically the Milky Way stretching right across the sky. And the way that they saw that was that if you look at the centre of the Milky Way, okay, we're looking back in towards the centre of our galaxy, but what you actually see from this planet isn't all of the stars, because there's so many millions of stars there that it's actually really difficult to there's basically how it is that there's so much interstellar dust between us and the centre of the galaxy. What we actually see is a broad sweep of light, but in the centre there's also this thing called the Dark Rift, which is a dark constellation. And if you're out on a clear night now, and you're away from light pollution, you'll see similar things in the night sky. You see the sweep of the Milky Way, and for instance, you can see the constellation of Cygnus in the middle of the night at the moment, and they're kind of dark patches. So that's what they were looking at. And what they did is that they tracked the motion of the sun along the ecliptic over time and charted its connection to this dark rift. Well, why were they doing that? Well, there's various different reasons. One of which is that they saw the dark rift as being the mouth of the underworld. This is the underworld we were talking about, the 9 gods belonging to. And they saw the underworld as being this kind of like place of birthing. So when a king, a Mayan shamanic king, ascended to the throne, what would happen would be that they were sort of depicted as being born out of the mouth of an animal, often like a frog. And this is a metaphor for being born out of the dark rift, out of the underworld, which they called Shabalba. And the sun itself was also seen as a kind of divine ruler. It's actually very parallel to the belief systems and megalithic culture in this country. And where effectively the king and the sun are seen as synonyms. So what they were really interested in was the fact that if you chart this 25,000 year cycle, there comes a point at which, if you observe the winter solstice sunrise, which is considered by them to be the most important, it's also considered in this country to be the most important. If you go to Stonehenge, the trilith, which faces the winter solstice sunset, is the biggest out of all the stones there. What you get is this really interesting optical conjunction, which is that if you were to be at a Maya site, what you would see is, during this era, is the sun rising in this position, conjunct basically the dark rift, and effectively right in the centre of the galaxy. So several thousand years ago you'd have seen it over here, and 3,000 years ago you'd seen it here, but only in this era do you see it at this particular position. So this isn't something that just happens on December 21st, 2012, because the sun's quite big and the galaxy's quite big. It happens over a 36-year period, so every winter solstice at the moment you're going to see this conjunction. But it was very, very significant for the Maya. And John H. Jenkins, the person who discovered this, who came up with this theory, it's really original, well-researched work. He basically also saw that these ideas were deeply, deeply ingrained into the Mayan mythological systems. Right across Mesoamerica, including the Mayan culture, a ball game has been played for millennia. And it's basically, it's played with a small rubber ball, and if you look at this as a ball court, basically high up on these walls, there's a stone ring, and the goal of the game is basically using just the elbows and knees to get this small rubber ball through that hole. What John H. Jenkins noticed was that these ball courts were actually aligned to the winter solstice. And the ball game is basically a metaphor for what's going on in the sky, because the ball represents the sun and the goal represents the dark rift, the centre of the galaxy. So when these two things come together, what you have is this conjunction, this alignment, and this is particularly important to them. So thinking about that, this is a remarkable thing, because this was basically the big time context that the Maya saw themselves in. Our context of time, the biggest that we get in the way that we think about time is a millennium. That's a huge amount of time. We celebrated that recently. It's a big deal, but there are no bigger cycles that we actually look at. Whereas by using mythology, by using story, what the Maya were able to do was basically make this big cycle, this 25,771 year cycle, accessible to all the people, because the enactment of these rituals, these ceremonies, these games, basically keeps the whole story alive. So it's a remarkable thing that this ball court, for instance, this is a drawing of the one at Zappa, it's built 300 BC. it's pre-Mayan actually, it's before the classic culture, and it's aligned to the winter solstice. So effectively what the Maya were doing at this time is they were aligning their temples to a conjunction which wasn't going to happen for 2,000 years. Can you imagine us doing that today? We'll build this building here because in 2,000 years' time that thing's exactly going to line up. But they did that because it gave them a sense of their context within the cycles of time. They basically, how it works is that when you look at the natural cycles that are happening, obviously there's the year, but the really big cycle that affects our planet and is the bigger time context that we're living in is the precession of the equinoxes. So it's this approximately 26,000 year cycle. So what the Maya did brilliantly is that they, and no other culture did this, is they came up with a stop point for it. And they also managed to get the concept across in their everyday mythology. So it's something that people would have been completely familiar with living in the Mayan culture. John's work is brilliant. It's really scholarly. I really recommend you check out his books. He wrote the 2012 story recently, Maya Cosmogenesis 2012. But if you go to the academics, you might well find that they're saying, well, this is not proven, etc. But this is Michael Groff. He's a Mayan academic, and a few of the Mayan academics are now basically coming over into a much broader camp, which is realising that actually, there's a lot going on with this Mayan stuff, and we really need to broaden our perspectives a little bit. It's not like studying some dead old culture, in some sort of laboratory context. Actually, we're discovering more and more stuff, and this is one of the recent discoveries. And it's another way that precession was known by the Maya. This is one of the 4 surviving books of the Maya. Unfortunately, when the European invasion happened, the Christian priests decided these were the work of the devil and burned hundreds of thousands of them. We have 4 left, and you can't really see it very well, but these are serpents that are coming down here, and there are numbers. There are 2 numbers in each one, and these are called serpent numbers, and basically these are tables for predicting lunar eclipses. And these 2 numbers basically show the differential, basically a way of calculating precession. So what Michael Groff has shown recently is that we now know that the Maya were counting precession. This isn't controversial. It's basically, this is very good evidence. He's a Mayan academic. His PhD thesis is basically exactly based on this. So, we're now coming around to a situation where the Mayan academics have kind of held back the kind of analysis of 2012 for a long time. They basically suggested that it was boring or irrelevant. And now what we have is we have an understanding that not only were the Maya great astronomers, great mathematicians, but their mythology, their culture was basically orientated towards this point. So it would have been fantastically important to the Maya, this particular nation that we're all living in at the moment. It was very, very significant indeed. And this is basically the kind of the thing I'd like to leave you with in this first part about the Maya, calendrical system, is that this is as I said earlier, something that if we discovered on the moon, we would immediately assume that this is a more advanced culture than us. But because we discovered it in Mexico, the general tendency has been to think of it as being, it's just an old thing. Look, they made some interesting pictures. But actually, when you get into it, what we're actually seeing is a very, very advanced culture indeed. That's the Maya. But what's really going on and what is shifting? Because if there is a paradigm shift, I'd like to make the argument there is. What's changing and from what to what. So this is kind of veering into the next section, because I'm going to be talking a lot about some amazing astronomical discoveries that have happened recently. And this is what the galactic alignment looks like if you were to be it's an artist's impression, but if you were to sort of be standing outside of the Earth-Moon system. It's actually the alignment that happened in 1999, because the Moon was in this position. But what you've got the Moon here, you've got the Earth here, you've got the Sun here, and you've got the galaxy here. So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about galactic alignment. And the next half, what I'm going to be talking about is why our understanding of the galactic alignment is going to change our society. Should we take a short break?
Woo!